So let me start the dialogue, and let's put the lights up so I can see the hands that go up. But please also be very active with the question. Okay, we already have a question here, so let's start here. Yes. Yeah, in the middle. Sorry. We'll come back to my question later, yes. And please put your hands up so the people with the microphone can be with you before we finish this question and answer. Yes.
Thank you very much, Senator. I'm Larissa, a climate scientist at the University of Copenhagen. And over the past few years, we've seen public trust in science erode and especially become a partisan issue, which also affects the Arctic. What are your strategies to rebuild that trust throughout the political spectrum so that science can effectively inform policy?
It's a great question because I think you have accurately summed the issue. People are starting to doubt the science, and it can, and we see it breaking down on partisan lines. I am a real believer in seeing is believing. Come to Alaska. Come to Alaska. Go out to Point Lay on the coastline there, where the permafrost thaw is so dramatic, we cannot figure out how to build homes and structures that can last. We're not making it up. Come and see for yourself. Come and talk to the people who have lived in these lands for generations, thousands of years perhaps. Talk to them about what they are seeing with the changing environment. Open your eyes. You might not appreciate what you're seeing on the TV or in your social media, but allow yourself to be educated by seeing. So I'm a big believer in field trips. I say, come up with me. I'll take you around. I'll show you what we're talking about. Because I think it really does make a difference. And perhaps they don't completely change, but the rhetoric is softened. So I would encourage you, it's not just me, we all need to do it. We all need to encourage those to see. You see and you believe.
Good, okay, there's a question there, yeah.
Senator Murkowski, my name is Glo Chitwood. I am from Seward, Alaska, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Iceland.
Hey.
How will you actively listen to Indigenous leaders here and your constituents back home and use that listening to inform your decisions on destructive projects like Ambler Road, a proposed mining road through sacred Indigenous homelands, a project that Alaska Native communities do not support? How will you ensure us right now that our energy transition will not come at the expense of Alaska Native communities who have not been sufficiently consulted with? And finally, how will you commit to ensuring Alaska Native sovereignty to say we will not move forward on projects that harm the very people who have the traditional knowledge we need to live in economic prosperity, not just for Ambler Road, but for harmful projects that move forward without sufficient application of free, prior, and informed consent?
It is an imperative that as we listen, as we engage in consultation, that consultation be more than just a word, allowing a checking of the box for a project to proceed. And this is where it is a level of outreach instead of waiting for those who can to come to speak to elected leaders in Washington, D.C. or in Juneau. The reality is that outreach needs to be made directly to the people and listening to them. And I think it is important, though, to recognize, and you point out in your question, Ambler Road. Ambler Road is a project that has generated its level of concern over access to subsistence resources, a concern that if you put a road, even a private road through a previously wilderness, not wilderness designated, but a very raw area, that you will disturb whether it is the caribou that are migrating through, impacting fisheries. And it has divided the native people who live in the region. And so you have some who are proponents because they believe that there will be economic development that will benefit them. But there are clear opponents who, again, fear for subsistence, who fear for the impacts that development will bring. And so this has been the challenge for Alaska. I think it is the challenge in many of our Arctic communities, where you are having to develop, to balance that level of development that is needed. Subsistence is not without its own cost. You have to have the money to fuel your boat so you can be out on the river, or a snow machine in the winter, or shells to be able to go out and harvest your game. And so those who want some semblance of an economy and jobs versus those who want no impact whatsoever is the ultimate challenge for us. Sometimes we do a really good job, other times we have not done such a good job. But listening to those who are there has to be the priority. They are the ones who are most immediately and directly impacted. Thank you for the question.
Okay, take a question there.
Hi, my name is Chris Dunn. I'm a Fulbright scholar here, affiliated with the Stevenson Arctic Institute here in Iceland, and a former Alaskan. My question is, the U.S., thank you for your speech, by the way, it was wonderful. My question is, the U.S. Republican Party has long been a global embarrassment in its denial and obfuscation of climate change and needed solutions. What are you doing to shift your party's positions and dialogue to immediately address this urgent crisis, particularly considering the role of fossil fuel political contributions in Alaska's continued dependence on fossil fuel income? Thank you.
So I've been known to start off responses to questions like that by saying I'm probably not a very good Republican at times, because I think that my party, the Republican Party, for years has taken a position on climate change that is not eyes wide open, and I think that is changing. I think we have certainly seen that coming around. I've seen it certainly in the Senate. The views of colleagues who were once loath to even mention the word climate are now addressing it, speaking about matters like how we address climate resilience. The tone has changed, and I think that has been important. It took a little bit of time, but I think that has changed. In fairness, we are a world, we are a planet that continues to need our petroleum resources, whether it, we might get our vehicles off of gasoline, we might change the way our jet airplanes fly around, but we will long be a world that will continue to need petroleum and fossil-based resources. So how we access them in a way that ensures that we can demonstrate the stewardship that we need for our planet, work to reduce our emissions while we still provide for growing economies, growing needs around the world. Again, this is our challenge.
My name is Barry Gardner, Member of Parliament from the UK. Senator Murkowski, you've long been a champion for tackling IUU fishing, and it's great that the US is signed up to the Treaty on the Central Arctic Ocean. But you referred in your speech to the what you saw as the less than fulsome acknowledgement of the problems of mineral resources and harvesting, and in particular, what would you say you would like to see the US doing about deep sea mining and the extraction of resources from the oceans?
It's a really timely question. I was in Norway just a couple months ago when they first announced, their government first announced that they were going to be looking towards that. Their parliament was a little, I think, apprehensive at the time. I don't know if that's the appropriate word for it. But these discussions are certainly underway. The rules of the road, if you will, are still to be laid down. I think that that is going to be critically important. Make sure that there is an understanding as to how anyone would operate in with regards to deep seabed mining. I think we need to be cautious. I think we recognize the potential for the minerals and the mineral wealth that lay beneath the seabed. But how we access that, how we harvest that, is something that we must be very, very cautious about how we do that. We have seen what happens to our fisheries when you have disruption at the bottom of the seabed floor. What happens to the crab? What happens to other fish species? So I am one that wants to know more about how this will proceed and who will be proceeding with it.
There's a final question there at the back. Yes.
Hello, my name is Emily, and I am a master's student at the University of Iceland, but I am an American citizen. And as we've been hearing, mitigation and adaptation efforts to address the climate crisis are desperately underfunded, as well as the Loss and Damages Fund. Every month without significant action brings us closer to 2 degrees warmer or more, which is terrifying, which would be apocalyptic, especially for the Arctic. Why is there a lack of money for effective climate action? But as we just heard from Treasury Secretary Yellen, we always have enough money for war.
I think you will see, and I mentioned it briefly in my comments, the resources that are coming out now as a result of not only the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which had, I think, significant resources directed towards renewable energy sources, cleaner energy sources, but then the follow-on legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, that I think it's fair to say has directed unprecedented funding for climate action, for climate resilience. Is it enough? Who knows what is enough? But I think what is important is that we are making steps, and I think very strong steps, in the United States. We have seen a reduction in our emissions in recent years that has been dramatic relative to other nations. And I think that our actions speak well of the United States and our efforts to address emissions and the impacts of climate change. So you've got legislation in place. That's one thing. You have to resource it, and we're doing that as well.
Let me also put this final question. It's interesting, nobody from the audience has asked you about Russia and China and the Arctic. But the thought occurred to me while you were speaking, how much do you think this enormous, impressive action program, as I called it, on the Arctic in the US, how much do you think the execution of that will be driven by a potential new geopolitical situation, seeing a race with China and Russia? And how much do you think it's driven by a real transformation of the role of the Arctic in general terms for the US? What I'm trying to say, if all of a sudden there was not a perceived threat from China and Russia, you think this would decline, or would it continue because the emphasis on the Arctic has now gained a transformative place within the US?
I wish I could say it was because the Arctic is in this elevated space, that there has been this transformative change within our country, our government, in terms of how the Arctic is viewed. I made a comment earlier this morning that while we have so long talked about the Arctic as this zone of peace, and we want to keep it that way, sometimes when a place is peaceful, it doesn't get a lot of attention, and if it doesn't get a lot of attention, it doesn't get a lot of resources. It doesn't get, whether it's the personnel, the legislation, or the appropriations that might help to elevate it. I think it is because of the political tensions. And you don't want to use that to necessarily elevate it, because then when those tensions subside, do you still have that level of commitment? I want to make sure that the United States commitment to the Arctic is there. It is enduring. It's beyond just Chinese balloons floating over Alaska into Canada and into the lower 48, beyond the consternation caused by this flotilla of Russian and Chinese ships that were in our Pacific waters. I want to make sure that the Arctic commitment, the U.S. Arctic commitment, is solid in its own right for all the right reasons.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I know it's not been easy for you to make the trip.
It's good to be out of Washington, we'll just say.
To be with us here today. It is enormously important. And as I said before, if you just look across the Arctic, you are clearly the democratically elected political leader in the Arctic with the greatest scope of influence and power in the years to come. And that's just a clinical assessment of your position, not just because of our friendship. And of course, your ultimate constituency is in Alaska, the constituency that re-elected you so splendidly despite the opposition you had. I think it's one of the great political victories in the United States in recent years that you preserved and prevailed in this way. But I hope you also realize here today, with a question from primarily young people here in the audience, that this is also part of your constituency. This is your global pan-Arctic constituency. And I think I speak on behalf of all the people here and those who will be listening to your speech as we broadcast it throughout the world, that I hope as you move forward in the coming 6 years where you have now been elected, we will also have the privilege and the benefit of the dialogue between this part of your constituency in addition to the Alaskans who legitimately elect you. Because it's of fundamental importance that we here, from wherever we come from, can have this kind of open dialogue, as has been demonstrated here in the last half hour or so, with those who are elected in the most powerful country in the world. So on behalf of all of us, I thank you again for consistently coming here. We will welcome you in the future. And now we will invite the Ted Stevens Center, named after your senatorial predecessor, to take the stage to continue the dialogue. Thank you very much.
So good to be with you. Thank you. I love your words.